What's up, everybody? I'm Dave Stutts here in my studio office at Sam Ash Music headquarters to give you an introduction to MIDI controllers. Maybe you're just starting out with your first piece of recording software, or maybe you just don't know the full potential that your MIDI controller is capable of. We're going to start from the very beginning and then move our way forward, try to get under the hood a little bit and see what these awesome pieces of gear are really capable of. So in part one, we have to get something important out of the way. What is MIDI? Now we're going to talk about MIDI in the most superficial, surface level terms as it relates to recording software. So let's jump in. Let me show you what MIDI is. Okay, so here I am in Logic Pro X, but this works across all major DAWs, digital audio workstations, or recording software. Those all mean the same thing. Now I have a blank software track that has no virtual instrument associated with it. It's just blank. Now I can right click and say create MIDI region. So now I've created this blank region right here. And I'm gonna slide it over to 2 measures. Now if I double click this blank MIDI region, I can go into the piano roll and I can manually draw in some notes. We'll do C, D, E, F, and G. And we'll bring the G all the way to the end. So we have half of a nice basic major scale. Now let's listen to what it sounds like when I play it. That's right, it sounds like nothing. I like to think of MIDI as being sheet music for virtual instruments. So as you can see, I've written the music, the notes are there, it has the information, it just doesn't have the instruments. So watch what happens now when I take this same MIDI region that I just manually drew in, and I just slide it down to a piano track. Let's listen to it now. And there you go, we have some music. Now I can take this same MIDI region, slide it down to a different instrument, in this case bass. And I can take this same region and even slide it down to a drum track. This should sound interesting. And if I wanted to, I could copy this MIDI region and I could paste it to each of these instrument tracks, and I could play them all together. That actually sounded a little cooler than I thought it would. And that's what MIDI is. It's this digital information. It's this digital sheet music upon which you can put an instrument and create music. Now I can take these and I can loop these indefinitely. And don't forget, they all came from that one single MIDI region that I drew in by hand. Some people make their entire careers based on drawing in the individual notes, clicking on each note and setting the velocity and doing everything by hand. And you might be thinking to yourself, there's gotta be an easier way to do this. And you're right, that's where MIDI controllers come in. What I have in front of me is not a digital piano, it's not a keyboard, it's not a workstation, so to speak. It's a MIDI controller. It's a means to which I can control MIDI without my keyboard and mouse. I can do it right here on this controller. And by keyboard and mouse, I meant this keyboard. So what a MIDI controller does in its most simplest form is allow you to control virtual instruments from within whatever recording software you use. So now if I click on this bass track, for instance, I can hit record and I can just do it by hand. And it took far less time than it would have taken if I had manually drawn in each note. Imagine if I wanted to play some chords. Let's record the most basic 1-4-1-5-1 progression. Can you imagine how long that would have taken if I had drawn in each note of every single chord? So MIDI controllers come in all sorts of shapes, sizes, variations. This little thing right here is a MIDI controller. This thing right here is a MIDI controller. You can even use most electronic drum kits as a MIDI controller. You can find MIDI controllers that are 1 octave, 49 keys, all the way up to this beautiful 88 key MIDI controller. They make some MIDI controllers that are just velocity sensitive pressure pads to make it easier to program in drum sounds. And honestly, a lot of digital pianos and keyboards these days can often double as MIDI controllers because some of them have USB ports in the back that you can plug into your computer, and there you go, you have a MIDI controller in its most simplest form. And then you can get an awesome MIDI controller like this, which I consider to be the Rolls Royce of MIDI controllers. It's the Arturia KeyLab 88 Mark II. It combines all of those things. You've got the percussion trigger pads here on the left. You've got transport controls here on the front. You've got faders, encoders, assignable buttons underneath the faders. It's got a dedicated save button, mute button, solo button. I mean, it just has everything on it. So on the most basic level, that's what a MIDI controller is. A MIDI controller helps you put music on the tracks. It helps you speed up your production and just make your overall workflow that much simpler and seamless. They're an invaluable tool for anybody who wants to create music. It's a must for any studio. So that's it for part one. In part two, we're gonna go over some setup techniques, because the more you have going on in your MIDI controller, the more setup may be required inside your DAW. So we're gonna do some troubleshooting and figure some stuff out to try to make it easier on you. But on the most basic level, if you go out and buy a MIDI controller and plug in the USB from the MIDI controller into your computer, more than likely you're going to be able to start playing your virtual instruments, and that's the key. That's the key takeaway. That's basic level one. Plug it in, start playing your virtual instruments. All right, everybody, that's it for part one. I'm Dave Stutts, and I'll see you next time.